Our goal today is to provide content that will support us in addressing the needs of all learners. Regular classroom teachers in Ontario serve a growing number of students with diverse abilities and needs. We will discuss methods of addressing those needs within your classroom. We draw our attention to the Greater Essex County District School Board core beliefs and understandings. In this session, we will focus on two of these beliefs. All students can achieve high standards given sufficient time and support. High expectations and early intervention are essential. We will examine strategies to help us in our goal of improving student achievement. The purpose of today's session is to bring awareness of cognitive processes that affect learning, develop instructional strategies to support these processes, introduce focused intervention in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 settings. Let's take a moment to interact. For the first activity, we will need 6 volunteers at the front of the room. The group is to create a cooperative story by taking turns, adding 1 sentence at a time. Each person must build their sentence based on the previous sentence, with the last person responsible for tying up loose ends. Opening sentence is, yesterday, Jim met Tammy at the beach. Pause the video now. Press play for the next set of instructions. The same 6 teachers will tell the story again with the following rule. You must only use words that do not contain an N in them. Now restart your story. When you have completed the story, have the participants discuss what they've experienced. This is what students with cognitive processing deficits experience all the time, every day, every class. Imagine an ideal classroom. In that classroom, we hope to have 80% of those students who get it and benefit from the whole class instruction model. We all know that within that same class, there are students who are struggling to understand and who require more assistance in order to get it. We only want this group to represent about 15% of the students. We are also familiar with the reality that there are students that will continue to struggle. In an ideal classroom, we want this percentage to be around 5%. This 5% will need much more intensive help. They may require services that go beyond the classroom. However, the reality is that we deal with all of these students on a daily basis. Why do some students struggle? Students who have difficulty learning in school have cognitive processes that impede their learning. Here are the 5 main processes: information processing, language, prior knowledge, memory, self-regulation, and executive functioning. Open your Learning for Reference handout to find a chart featuring the 5 cognitive processes that affect learning. The top row lists all 5 cognitive processes. The next row shows indicators or signs of what students have difficulty with for each process. The subsequent rows contain instructional strategies, environmental strategies, as well as assessment strategies. The last row recommends resources from our professional bookstore, as well as ministry documents for further information. Let's take a look at the first column, information processing. For some students with information processing difficulties, it may be due to keeping up with the pace or speed of instructional language, understanding and processing instructions or activities, reading both at comprehension and word recognition, basic math skills, copying information, speed of task completion. All of these difficulties have to do with the way the brain takes in information, processes it, and then outputs information. It's like an assembly line. The whole system can be affected by a breakdown in any part of the process. To be effective, the intervention needs to address the stage where the breakdown happens.
Right now I'm working with a bunch of grade 12 students, and we are working on writing essays. And probably the greatest frustration that I see with these particular students, and I think it applies to all of them, is they never know where to start. Where do I start? I have a huge project. I know where I've got to go to get to the end, but I have no idea how to get started just to get the ball rolling. And that's probably one of the biggest problems and frustrations I see with the students.
I try to gear it towards each individual student. So particular, if it's in a short story unit, I would give students that I know are struggling with comprehension strategies to cope with that, so their comprehension strategies. And then I would focus more on comprehension type questions.
Chunk the sections of the project that they're working on, so that we take it in terms of baby steps. So instead of being an overwhelming amount of work, we chunk things into smaller little pieces. First thing that you need to do is you need to be able to answer this question. Once you have that question answered, then we move on to this one. Once we're answered that one, then we can move on to the next step. It allows them to see that things are much more manageable. They don't become emotionally frustrated when you break it down in that way. And I think they actually find that once they see that they're getting these steps underway, they actually become more confident in the things that they're doing.
Let's take a moment to interact. Think of a student you teach who may display some of the characteristics of slow info processing. Refer to the chart. Read through the instructional strategies and environmental strategies for information processing. Turn to a partner and discuss any strategies that you've already tried and you would consider trying. Share any successes you have had with this student. Students may have difficulty with executive functioning problems affect working memory. This means that the student will struggle with all aspects of executing a task. This includes planning, organizing, selecting on a consistent basis. Therefore, this will impact on students beginning and completing tasks and monitoring their work.
Students tend to become disorganized, they kind of lose focus with what's going on in class. And sometimes giving instructions in an auditory way only is not enough to spell out the lesson and the plans for the day for the students.
Students may also exhibit difficulty with self-regulating their attention, impulses, behavior, and emotions. Executive functioning problems affecting the student's working memory. If the student cannot hold information long enough in their working memory to execute the task, they tend to be unable to stay with any given task. Students have difficulty with multitasking and working with complex tasks.
Working memory is often referred to as an active mental workspace. It's a cognitive system that allows us to hold and manipulate information online for a few seconds during problem solving or other cognitive activities. And it's this internal representation in working memory that we use to guide our decision making, so that behavior and actions are not dominated by immediate sensory cues in the environment. Inattention, we know, also is associated with poor academic achievement, and academic underachievement is a major concern for school-age children. By contrast, as we shift into adolescence, yes, indeed, the problems continue with the difficulties of inattention, the inner restlessness.
I can think of a student right now, every day comes into class, says, "Sir, what are we doing? Sir, is there any work for today? Sir, was there any handouts? Sir, what's the homework? Sir, what are we doing right now?" And before, I would have to go over that again and again. And sometimes there'd be one student, two students, three students, and they would be lost. And I realized this isn't working. We need a system. We need some way to refer all the students to all the information they need quick, so we can stay on the topic, so we can stay on the task at hand. And that's what having that smartboard agenda up every day does. Every time the student comes into the classroom, they'll see on the board, ready to go at the start of class, is the date at the top, the topic that we're doing, and then right underneath that is a reminder of all the important dates that are coming up in the next week or the next month, anything they need to be aware of. Underneath that, we start out in a nice ordered format, the agenda for the day. So warm-up activity, what they should be doing, what they should expect, any handouts coming through in the class, and then from there, any homework or follow-up activities for the day.
Time to interact. Using the chart, reflect on your learning experiences or of friends that demonstrated some of these characteristics. In a group of 4, discuss what you or someone else could have done to have helped you be more successful. Refer to the chart for ideas. Students may have difficulty understanding language of the classroom. Both oral and written language can be categorized into 3 areas: content, use, and form. Content refers to the comprehension of language. A comprehension deficit manifests itself in an inability to understand complex or abstract language, for example. Interpreting math word problems, geography or science terminology, or with inferencing in English or history or other subjects. The use of vocabulary is being able to express yourself coherently and logically, and to retrieve precise words when speaking. The third category where deficits arise is in the use of social language, which includes the knowledge of rules needed for storytelling, for discussion, or for making and keeping friends. The final category is the form of language. This means knowing the correct use of grammatical structure in both oral and written format. Participants of our initial activity told how they felt or what they experienced while they tried to create a sentence while not using a word with an N. The frustration of trying to think of a word that would fit, the decrease of creative storytelling, the embarrassment in front of peers. These challenges face students with language deficits every day in every class.
Some things that frustrate students can be when asking them questions. When given a question about a certain topic, whether it be in science or basically any subject, the thought process they go through to actually think of the answer. It's frustrating not only to the student, but also to the teacher, because they think the student's not paying attention. Meanwhile, the student's still processing what the question was. So it's just all in all a frustrating situation. When you're about to ask a question, you can actually call out the student's name first. Say, Johnny, this question's coming at you. Tell the question to the whole class so Johnny's ready for the question, and then once you're done posing the question, they've had time to process it, think about it, and actually give you an answer. You can also repeat the question. Honestly, it seems like such a simple thing, but just hearing the question over again, maybe even rephrasing, putting emphasis on important key terms and words that you want them to know for possible tests or quizzes later on, just simple repeating of the instruction really helps these learners process the information.
Time to interact. Imagine a student having difficulty expressing themselves, orally and in writing. What strategies would you use from the chart? When you are finished sharing with your partner, the whole group should share. Working memory deficits. Students will have difficulty with remembering previously taught information. This info is held briefly and then forgotten unless it is stored in a salient way with use of graphic organizers, a personal or emotional connection, etc. Maintaining relevant information during multiple steps, procedures, or sequencing information.
Sometimes only giving the instructions to students verbally doesn't work for all of them. There are a select group of students who have no problem remembering the verbal cues and what they have to do, but a majority of the students will forget from the start of the class to 30 minutes later what they were supposed to do or what the goal is of the day.
Working memory has a limited capacity. Students with this problem cannot hold large amounts of info in working memory and manipulate it.
As a history teacher, a lot of times the students are frustrated with the amount of knowledge they have to retain and recall, and the sheer volume. We cover 1914 to present, so almost a century.
They will need us to break down instruction or tasks into smaller chunks with constant use of visuals or templates, etc.
To make it work for my students, I really focus on quizzing them regularly, so repetition, and I also try to bring in relevant and current examples, bringing the past to the present.
Auditory or verbal memory impacts on reading comprehension, writing, and vocabulary use. Visual or spatial memory impacts learning in math, science, or geography. Let's take a moment to interact. Think of a person you know with an acquired brain injury, dementia, or Alzheimer's. What strategies from the handout would you use to support these persons? Describe them with your elbow partner. Prior knowledge. Students will have difficulty with 1. Linking old knowledge with new information. All learning is founded on prior knowledge and experience. 2. Using strategies to remember new information. As we have new experiences and learning, the brain organizes this knowledge into structures. Think of it as a computer with many filing systems. 3. Making sense of new information while reading or listening. Students who lack prior experiences may have difficulty relating to new information because the structures, or filing systems, are missing. They are unable to use strategies to remember new information. They need help to build structures in their learning.
Whenever you can relate it to real-life situations, it's very helpful to the students. They only know what they've learned in their lifetime. When you can relate it to something that they know, they take it in a lot more.
These students may often appear to be disengaged, when in actuality they cannot relate the new learning or information to any previous learning or experience.
It's always wonderful to take those students who are getting things much quicker and have them teach their peers. I find sometimes the peers teach better than we do. They speak in a language that the students understand.
Like I said, I teach history, so I have the luxury of using a lot of historical films, like Saving Private Ryan or Pearl Harbor. They're all blockbuster, Academy Award-winning films, so the students actually have a visual representation of what I'm talking about.
Sometimes the problem with mathematics isn't always the new topic. Sometimes it's an older topic, and sometimes it's a very simple topic that students just can't get. To help alleviate the problem, every day I like to start my class off with a very short, quick warm-up activity. This warm-up activity will always cover an essential skill. A warm-up activity gives me a chance to review essential skills quickly with students before we get to the major topic at hand.
Let's take a moment to interact. Read and fill in the blanks with your table group. Are most of your answers similar? Let's add a clue. Now fill in the blanks again with your latest clue. Check your accuracy. Prior knowledge helps us frame our understanding or lack of it. Time to interact. Read this case scenario. Share your suggestions with the whole group.
We're all hopeful that our kids will improve, but hope isn't a strategy. It's this kind of thing that allows us to go pick a strategy, work towards improvement, and then look for results.
Now that we are aware of strategies we can use to support our struggling learners, let's revisit this diagram. We need to strategically think about how to intervene for 20% plus of students who don't get it. We are familiar with the use of high-yield strategies in delivering quality instruction in our classrooms every day. We know that in order to improve their learning, we must become more precise in the strategies we use in our classrooms. We have added tiers to the same diagram to further explain how precise intervention works. You can see that Tier 1 relates to whole class instruction, instruction that is effective, explicit, and differentiated for all learners. Tier 2 instruction is provided for some in your class who are unable to grasp concepts and understandings during whole class or Tier 1 instruction. These students require more targeted, precise teaching, possibly in small, flexible, needs-based groups or individually in order to understand new learning. Tier 3 instruction is for those students who have been unsuccessful in both Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction and need more intensive approach to their learning. Some of these students are referred for further consultation with the special education personnel. Tier 3 students need personalized planning in order to meet their learning needs. School-based team meetings, along with our PLCs, collaborate to determine what each student's plan will include. Why tiers? A three-tiered approach promotes early intervention. We want to accelerate learning rather than use the wait-to-fail model where the learning gaps are huge. We need to examine early where the student is falling off the tracks and intervene before the gap becomes too big. Students that participate in intensive instruction as soon as they need it are less likely to require special education services later. This is a design created by Marco Bruno, a high school student in the York Catholic Board. This is his story of what he sees as essential within the classroom. Let's take a moment to interact. Talk about his interpretation. Consider a title for this piece. Tier 1 includes all students. It is effective. Differentiated instruction. Tier 1 includes teachers evaluating student progress through assessments and flagging any at-risk students to be discussed during team learning communities. Think of it this way: high-quality whole group instruction plus some small group focus should be adequate to support almost all, 80%, of students who begin the year at grade level in accomplishing what they need to move to the next grade right on target.
These are the elements of a narrative here. I know theme is the writer's message and sort of that underlying big idea. Identify two more of those elements here and define them. You're going to, in a moment when the music starts, stand up and find somebody in the room. You're going to give them one of the elements of a narrative that they don't have. You're going to get from them one of the elements of a narrative that you don't have.
We often have kids that don't get engaged in class, and I'll never know how they're doing until they write a test or until they write a quiz. Anytime I can get the students excited about learning and about showing me what they know, then the stress is off. Often when kids do practice things, they do really well, and when the time finally comes to do it as a formal evaluation, they get panicked and nervous, and they don't think as clearly as they would when they're just doing an assessment piece.
Tier 2 in the classroom includes teachers identify students who are not progressing satisfactorily in aspects of Tier 1 instruction. Tier 2 involves focused, explicit instruction in small groups or individually in addition to Tier 1 programming. For example, the teacher may be working directly with one group while others are engaged in meaningful tasks. Groups are formed and reformed on student needs and teacher progress monitoring. Tier 2 instruction can be changed based on frequency of the groups, more sessions per week, intensity, less students in a group, and duration, more time in a group session. It is important to note that consultation with special education staff can occur for teachers with Tier 2 questions.
Are there hockey teams like that around here? Oh yeah. We have dialogue during the year that I build a rapport with each student in my class, get to know what they like, what they do in their spare time. The things that they are interested in reading is one of the things I ask at the beginning of the year and at the beginning of the short story unit, so I can sort of gauge what things they might be interested in and ones I know they definitely wouldn't be.
If I'm doing a question in class, I might have them quickly choose an answer. And because it's anonymous, I can quickly assess where they are. The kids aren't worried about the fact that I'm recording the information, but it gives me as a teacher a feeling of I'm on the right track, they're understanding what I'm teaching, so now it's time for us to move on to the next point or to move on to the next concept. The kids have this sense of anonymity. Even though they know I'm recording the answers and that I might look back at it later, they're not worried because their friends aren't seeing it. The friends aren't seeing them taking that risk and maybe not getting the right answer. And so they're more willing to try.
Using our data to reevaluate and see if we're making the gains, if we're headed in the right direction, and if not, reevaluating again and making changes to that explicit instruction so that we can try to better meet their needs.
Tier 3 instruction is more intensive for students who do not respond to Tier 1 and Tier 2 intervention. The school team or learning community could recommend a referral for consultation or further collaboration for Tier 3 students. Some Tier 3 students are formally identified and have an IEP, Individual Education Plan, which explains the student's learning needs in detail.
So who do you think are characters in this? Mr. and Mrs. Lacey. So what do you think is going to then happen? What do you predict? What do you anticipate?
If students don't appear to be making gains, then we have to step back and take a look at why they're not making the gains that we wanted them to make. And as a team, we look at different strategies that we can use with them. And it's great during our PLCs as a group discussion. We can throw out a variety of strategies, and I might get some strategies from someone that I wasn't using and I didn't think of. So that really helps us. But also it can point out to us the students that might need further intervention.
Time to interact. Name at least 3 students in your class or classes that could be falling, as in this picture. What problems do they exhibit? List their names on the template provided. This process can be followed when we plan for increasing our benchmark students as noted on our strategic learning plans. Example entries have been provided for you on the template. If we specify the cognitive processes deficits of each of our red flag students and determine intervention strategies, it will be easier to plan for meeting their needs. Given what you learned today, consider the students you have listed on your template. Determine what strategies could be implemented in your next class and what steps you can take to monitor the student's progress. Take time to discuss recommendations with your group. Marco Bruno's illustration so aptly shows us that we can catch them all as we become more precise in our day-to-day instruction in the classroom and as we support each other in our school's learning community.